So yeah, I mean, yes, it's quite closely modeled. I mean, the thing I should say about the Rashid character is everybody assumes it's me, you know. And obviously there's a sense in which it is a kind of satirical portrait of, you know, the author as an old, bald, fat guy. But it's also a portrait of my father, you know, because really the first stories I ever heard were from him. You know, and he was a very good bedtime storyteller. And the first time I heard a lot of the famous, you know, Arabian Night stories and so on, you know, were in his versions. So he was, you know, my Shah of Blah. And so he's in there too. So it's a sort of mixture of him and me, I guess.
If I could, I'd like to ask you a more specific question about a moment in the book itself. For all of its liveliness and adventure, you're also at points in it making some pretty serious, I think, observations about contemporary culture, and specifically about the status of magic and belief in the old stories in our world. And I'm thinking here specifically of when Luca reaches the heart of magic itself, and Soraya says to him, you know, it's in some disrepair. And then if I could just quote for a moment, she then goes on to explain that, quote, magic is fading from the universe, its elements aren't needed anymore, or that's what you all think with your high definitions and your low expectations.
Yeah.
What did you mean by, what are these high definitions and low expectations?
Television sets. I wanted to, you know, the book in some ways celebrates this new world of, you know, kind of electro fun. But at that point it also suggests that there's a danger associated with it, which is that we might be losing touch with a very important and older tradition of pleasure, which is the pleasure of narrative and story. I mean, right at the beginning of the book, Luca, at one point, in a kind of slip of the tongue, refers to something as being only a story. And it's actually Nobo Daddy, his fake father, who tells him off, you know, and says, you know, you of all children, you know, the storyteller's son, you should know better than that. And he says, you know, man is the storytelling animal. And then he goes on, you know, I can't remember what, do rats tell tales? Do porpoises have narrative purposes? Do elephants elephanticize? No, they don't. He says, man alone burns with books. And it's that idea that the business of storytelling is not just, you know, my job. It's something very close to the heart of human nature. You know, that we are the storytelling animals, and there's nothing else on the earth that does it. You know, we're the only people, only creatures who do this weird thing of telling each other stories, sometimes true, sometimes untrue, in order to try and understand the kind of creatures that we are. And so it's right there. I mean, I sometimes think, you know, Steven Pinker famously said that we had a language instinct, and that helped us learn language so quickly, which is a very difficult thing to do. And I've come to feel sometimes that we also have a story instinct, that, you know, that we're kind of hardwired for story. You know, babies are born, they want sustenance, and immediately after that they want somebody to sing them a song and tell them a story. You know, it's right at the heart of who we are. And I just felt, and Soraya expresses it at that point in the story, a concern that we might be taking our eye off that ball, you know, and that it was important to mention that.
Given the primacy you assign to storytelling, one of the things that is of course true across your work is also the primacy you accord to religion. And you have over the course of your career written critically about religion's influences, its power to dominate individual lives.
Oh, really?
But I'm trying not to say a word. I decided I'm going to try to go the whole night without saying one word.
Sorry, go on.
But at the same time, it goes without saying that your books are just immersed fully in religious symbol and religious story. And so I'm wondering, what is the best possible relationship you envision between religion and literature, between faith and the imagination?
Well, atheists are very interested in religion because, you know, it's the enemy. But to be serious, I think one of the things that this book tries to talk about is that the origin of all story is sacred story. You know, that's the first stories that people told were probably religious stories. They were stories which attempted to, you know, to explain the world, which was mysterious, in terms of supernatural beings. You know, I mean, the great questions of life. You know, the two great questions of life are: how did we get here? And now that we're here, how shall we live? So the question of origins, the question of ethics. You know, and there's no doubt that religious stories were the first stories which attempted to take on those great questions and to provide answers that people could accept. And then at a certain point, of course, there's a parting of the ways, and the world of story separates from the sacred story, and you can have secular stories, but there's no question that the origin is sacred narrative. And one of the things that this book tries to, it does it in a kind of comic way, is to say how many of the world's great religions, once they stopped being things that people literally believed in, became available to us as literature. You know, so the Greek myths were originally the Greek religion. You know, they originally had temples and priests and, you know, inquisitions and so on. And that's true of the whole body of world mythology. Originally, these were active, living religions. You know, now they're extinct religions, which immediately makes them available to us in a much more interesting way, to me, as narrative and as incredibly rich stores of story, in which meaning is concentrated and held in very, very intense form, you know, and can be inexhaustibly explored. So very important. And then it just occurred to me that it must be a bit sad to be a discarded god. You know, to go from being omnipotent one minute to being unemployed. You know, and it struck me that there were actually quite a lot of these, you know, jobless gods. And so I thought I'd allow one of the zones that Luca passes through to be this zone of discarded deities, you know, sort of desperately trying to cling on to the memory of grandeur, you know, when actually nobody could remember their names anymore. And the other thing I have to say is that I enormously prefer polytheism to monotheism. I think monotheism is just tedious. Polytheism is fantastic because there's so many stories, and the reason it's so good is that the gods are not moral examples. You know, if you look at across the world, the polytheistic traditions, the gods don't behave well. They behave really badly. You know, they're greedy and lustful and vain and cruel and every fault you could possibly. And being gods, they could do this on a much bigger scale than us. So they're like human beings with all our failings and a few of our good qualities, but on a giant scale. That makes them fantastic fictional characters, and I'd much rather read about them, you know, than the poor old gods we've got now. So that's I think my relationship as a writer with the world of the religious story is about those ancient stories. Because, as I say, once people stop believing in them as religion, they become available to me as literature. And they're very rich stories, you know. But the gods that people believe in, I'm not so keen on. You may have heard that.
Yes. I have a few other questions, but if there are questions from the crowd, I'm not sure if we want to. I know it's important to sort of stay within our time frame to a degree. So if there are questions, I'd be happy to field them now.